Okay, that's better. Okay, so many of you have already been on and have heard us chatting, but so the update is that Masood did have an unexpected matter come up a little while ago that he needed to deal with. He does send his regrets. If you were really hoping to learn about the 4 R's today and are sad to hear he's not here, send us a note and we'll try to organize either another presentation from him or we can record something and post it. So there's some quick instructions on this front page here about how to use the GoToWebinar platform if you're new to it. The biggest thing is if you have questions, just go ahead and type them into the questions box, and I will pass those on to our speaker. So I'll moderate those. And with that, I do want to make sure that I say thank you to everyone that has been a part of the organization, especially to our presenters. First up will be Hotze Wijnja from MDAR, and he is the environmental chemist. He played a huge role, maybe I should say the primary role, in writing and organizing these regulations and the follow-up. And then Kate from NRCS is also with us today, who many of you already know. She's just phenomenal. She's all over the state. She's a farmer herself, as well as working with a number of farmers. So she's going to talk us through some record keeping strategies. Also, thank you to Northeast Air and the Cedar Tree Foundation, who support both the Livestock Institute and the UMass Center for Food, Ag, and the Environment through some grants. So without further ado, I'm going to put myself on mute, and Hotze, I'm going to pass it off to you. And I'm just going to make you the presenter here.
Okay.
And you can take it away.
Can I share my screen? Oh yeah, show my screen, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I appreciate this opportunity to take part in a workshop to go over some plant nutrient management related aspects. As Sam indicated, I played a role in the development of these regulations, and these regulations are now in effect, have been in effect for several years, and the department's activities related to these regulations are mostly related to at this point to outreach and education, and in some cases responding to complaints or questions that come up, and so it is these regulations were developed, and the department has the regulatory authority. However, it is an unfunded mandate, so resources are very limited, and so we certainly appreciate the efforts by UMass to further develop guidelines and also the relationship and the working relationship with NRCS is an important one to further implement these regulations. And so I appreciate your time to attend. We all know that winter weather takes time out of our days on the farm as well off the farm. And from my days working at a farm, I certainly remember that a lot of new things come up on those days when snow falls and things freeze up. So and we all are here to maybe take a break from those activities of dealing with that and catch up on some nutrient management stuff. So I will provide a regulatory overview with a focus on on what the regulations specify relative to nutrient management plans and record keeping. That is the focus of this workshop, and so my part will be kind of the introduction to what Kate will then provide more details, more on the practical aspects of record keeping related to nutrient management. So oops, sorry, did I do something now? I don't see my screen right now. Oops, oh yeah. Can you see this?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Okay.
You're on the plant
Right.
nutrient regulations.
Okay, yeah. This slide just highlights the various different players that were involved with the development of these regulations. Plant nutrients playing clearly a role in many industries: agriculture, green industry, but also homeowners. There are scientific aspects to it, societal aspects, governments come into play with regulations and laws, municipalities deal with it, public health is aspect of it. So all these things came into play and are in play relative to the use of plant nutrients. And so I'm trying to advance next. Okay. And so plant nutrient management, proper plant nutrient management is something that is needed to support agricultural production, such that it provides economic, social, and environmental benefits. On the other hand, if it's not poorly managed, if it is poorly managed in terms of nutrient applications, it can decrease profitability on farms, as well as increase nutrient losses, which in turn can potentially degrade water and air. And therefore, there was an effort to develop a law and put regulations in effect. In Massachusetts, that happened a number of years ago, but there were other states where the plant nutrient issue was more of became an issue earlier on, and similar laws and regulations were put in place. So a little bit of the background and history of these regulations. The legislature in Massachusetts passed an act on regulation of plant nutrients in 2012. And that was basically the results of two efforts. There was one effort to address fertilizer runoff from lawns and turf, and specifically limiting the use of phosphorus-containing fertilizers. That was phosphorus fertilizer use was linked to water quality issues, and so there was clearly a need to address that. And so that was one driver, actually one of the major drivers of these regulations. The other driver was an effort to address the regulation of plant nutrient applications to agricultural land on a statewide basis. What happened in certain towns was that they were trying to regulate that at a local level, and that was particularly for the agricultural industry and community, was something that was viewed as highly or that is something that shouldn't be result in a patchwork of different sets of requirements, in different towns across the state. So there was an effort to have something statewide in place, and that these two efforts basically were merged and resulted in this act that authorizes MDAR to develop and implement and enforce regulations. And so the directions from the act that we basically had to follow was specify when plant nutrients may be applied and locations in which plant nutrients shall not be applied. Develop regulations regarding the use of plant nutrients designed to mitigate risks to human health and the environment, and work in conjunction with UMass Extension to ensure consistency with educational and outreach programs. So that was an important aspect of the Act that we recognized and followed up on with UMass, certainly with the development of the regulations, and we also think it is an important part of the implementation of these regulations. Further, the Act also directed us to consult with Mass DEP. Mass DEP has a regulatory authority in terms of water quality, and particularly a relevance to the nutrient management. And so they were involved with the development of regulations, particularly also making sure that these regulations were consistent with their regulatory program. And there was another part that was an important driver, was the regulations actually enhance the ability of municipalities to maximize the credits relative to stormwater discharge or similar permits issued by EPA. By having these regulations in place, towns can get credits and thereby save money on having to update water treatment facilities that otherwise could be very costly. So we went through the process. To be clear, it was kind of rushed when the Act was passed. We were kind of pushed to get these regulations in place, particularly for the non-ag part. And so we went through the process, had some interactions with stakeholders, but we finalized an initial version of these regulations. They were promulgated and became effective in 2015. And as we did outreach on these regulations, we had interactions with stakeholders, and we learned that there were issues with the way certain regulatory requirements were now effective. So we became aware of that, and at the same time, there was also the Baker administration had an executive order to review all regulations. And as part of that, there was an opportunity to go back and amend regulations based on the feedback that we got from stakeholders. And so amended regulations were then promulgated in January 2018, and those are the ones that are now in effect, and that's where we have to work with. And so, in general, the purpose of these regulations is to ensure that plant nutrients are applied in an effective manner to provide sufficient nutrients for maintaining healthy agricultural land and production. At the same time, also minimize impacts of nutrients on surface and groundwater resources to protect human health and the environment. So those are two aspects that come into play here. And so I'm just going over briefly over the what the regulations require for agricultural land in general. As I mentioned earlier, the Act directed us to make sure consistency with UMass educational and material and guidelines. So the regulations make reference to UMass guidelines in many places. And so you will see in many places to follow UMass guidelines for nutrient management. We realize that not all aspects are necessarily covered by UMass guidelines, so I will get to that later on too. There's some language that allows some flexibility to use other guidelines and sources to to address certain specific aspects. The regulations also specify areas and conditions where not to apply plant nutrients, such as surface water, saturated soil, frozen or snow-covered soils. There are setbacks specified from sensitive areas, such as public water supply areas, restrictions for applications to frozen and snow-covered soils, and also, and that is of course the topic of this workshop, is there are criteria specified for nutrient management planning and what should be in a nutrient management plan. And that's where I will focus on for the rest of the presentation. And so a nutrient management plan is a written plan to manage the amount, placement, timing, and application of plant nutrients and materials. It goes back to the 4 R's of plant nutrient management. And again, with the purpose to maintain and optimize productivity of a soil, and at the same time minimize nutrient loss and runoff and leaching that can have negative impacts on the environment. A plan, the regulations state that a plan should be maintained by the operator of an agricultural operation. It can be developed by either the operator, farmer, him or herself, or a nutrient management professional service provider can also develop those plans. With respect to nutrient management plan requirements, there are 3 situations that regulations consider, and that is particularly related to the availability of UMass guidelines, specifically for type of operation or agricultural commodity. The first situation is that UMass has guidelines for nutrient management for a given type of operation or commodity. And if such guidelines are in place, then one can follow those guidelines for that particular type of operation. And the information maintained as part of any of these UMass guidelines, a guideline or a recommendations constitutes the plan for the agricultural that particular agricultural operation. So so that was something that came out of our interactions with stakeholders. And so that's where there is a reliance on UMass guidelines. But there are situations we are aware of that UMass guidelines are not covering every type of operation or commodity, and so therefore there are 2 other situations where the regulations provide some additional criteria that can be followed. So when no UMass guidelines are available and the operation has 10 or more acres of agricultural land, then there are criteria specified in the regulations for a basic nutrient management plan, and I will go over those in a little bit. So that's the second situation. And then the third situation is that there are no UMass guidelines for a particular commodity and the operation is less than 10 acres. And in that situation, the regulations specify some basic record keeping criteria. I will go over that in a little bit too. So record keeping, and that's more or less the focus of this workshop, is an integral part of nutrient management planning. there's a need to have the proper information and data to do proper nutrient management planning. And so the regulations have some language in there that state that records shall be kept and maintained by the operator or person. That is the language that is literally in there. And I copied the definitions that are in the regulations of operator, which is a person who manages and or owns an agricultural operation. And the definition of a person, as you can see, is much broader. But anyway, we have had questions in the past on who is responsible for keeping records. Noting that records, the information that is kept is going to be part of a nutrient management plan, whether a very simple one or a more comprehensive one. So ultimately, I think the focus is on the operator of the farm that ultimately maintains a nutrient management plan and follows that. Then some elements of a basic nutrient management plan that the regulations specify. So that's for the situation when there's no UMass guidelines and more than 10 acres of land in the operation. Basic elements are maps, identifiers, and crop plan for fields, inventory of on-farm agricultural byproducts such as manure, and assessment of available plant nutrients from these sources. That is, if that is applicable to the operation, that should be part of an operation-wide evaluation. And then field-based assessments are part of a nutrient management plan where a nutrient budget for a planned crop is being specified, where a planned crop and yield goals are identified, soil tests and or plant tissue test information is part of that, should be part of that. The crop needs for primary nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, based on recommended application rates that can be tables or manuals from UMass or other relevant sources. Nutrient credits from manure, previous crops, or cover crops, whatever is applicable. And evaluation of limiting factors such as excessive soil phosphorus levels, where there may be guidelines for phosphorus mitigation measures applicable in that situation. Further field-based assessment aspects are planned applications for fertilizer, manure, and other plant nutrient materials such as compost and biosolids. Records then of actual applications, including the rate, the dates, estimated crop yields that were considered, and application methods are all relevant aspects of that. And then typically there's a periodic review, annual or so, evaluation and updates that may be needed to be made. And then, the third situation, so the previous one was for the situation where operations have more than 10 acres and no UMass guidelines exist. When it is a small operation of an type of a farm where there are no UMass guidelines available for that type of operation, then the regulations specify some basic record-keeping requirements, which include soil test results and recommended application rates, quantities and analyses and sources of plant nutrients that were applied, dates and methods of application, and the crops planted and estimated yields. So that's a more basic set of requirements. And then the regulations also specify that all plan and record keeping shall be kept for at least 3 years. And then there's language that was certainly added with the amendment, because it was certainly pointed out by stakeholders that UMass guidelines do not cover every aspect in terms of nutrient management and agricultural types of operations and crops. And so we came up with this kind of general language that allows some flexibility in using other guidelines and sources for practices. And so that is this language that if it is not available then from UMass, then they can follow equivalent extension service standards or standard industry practices until such time that UMass guidelines become available. We have had we actually made reference to this language in the context of biosolids, for instance. Biosolids, there were inquiries that we received about, that UMass guidelines don't really provide details for the use of biosolids, and so there was kind of a need for more specific guidelines for biosolids, and there are standards available from the wastewater and biosolid industry that are pretty comprehensive and seem to be overall consistent with nutrient management practices for other materials. So this language allows the use of the other equivalent extension service standards from, say, other states or specific industry standards that then can be followed. In summary, the regulations require nutrient management planning and having a nutrient management plan in place, and that is part of something that if there's a need to go out and assess a situation at a farm, there should be information that can be verified that nutrient management is done according to current standards, and to have records and a plan in place. That is the way that it can be verified if needed. I mentioned, I think, several times that there is the regulations make reference to UMass guidelines. The Act directed us to make sure that requirements were consistent with UMass materials, and so there is the reference to guidelines, and then there are some basic nutrient management plan criteria and record keeping criteria specified in the regulations for situations where UMass guidelines are not available. So that can be used if other guidelines are not available. And so this is what I plan to present as an introduction to what UMass was going to present, and then Kate from NRCS is going to provide further details on this aspect of nutrient management. there is a website. There's information on these on the plant nutrient management and the regulatory information, fact sheets, links to resources, and if there are any updates that will be posted there. That is on the website. When you go to mass.gov, search for plant nutrient management, and that will bring you to this web page where that information is available. And with that, I'm certainly available for questions. I think we'll do that at the end. And I'll hand it back to Sam to continue with the next speaker.
Great. Well, actually, if you have a minute before we move on to Kate, I might give you a couple of questions now that have come in.
Okay.
The first one, it's always a hot one, is how are these regulations currently being enforced?
The department has the authority to enforce these regulations. I pointed out already in the beginning that the department was not given additional resources in the context of having the authority with these regulations. So currently it is done on a complaint basis. If we get a complaint relative to a certain operation, we will we'll go out. We've done that in the past, or during the last few years, we have done that a few times. We go along with inspectors from other programs that regularly visit farms, and we tag along, and we obtain information on related to the issue that was brought up, and so that has happened a few times with biosolids. Biosolids is an issue in certain towns where the town the town residents complain about odor and things like that. So that has come up a few times where we basically have gone out and looked at what the practices were that the farmer used, and if there was a plan in place, and so that's how we have acted on a few complaints. We are not as that there is no requirement to submit plans to the department for review. It is something that should be in place and available for inspection if there is such a need. So that's how it's going to be enforced, unless we get more resources that we can really dedicate more time and staff time to do more of that. But the focus is currently on education and outreach.
Great. And so 2 more questions came out of that. One being, and it might be variable, when a farm visit is made in response to a complaint, how long does the farmer have to produce records, is the first question. And then the second question being, is the person that reported a complaint followed up with? So in that context, I could see a lot of dairy farmers say, I'm applying my manure on time, my neighbors complain, now I apply it late so they don't complain. So do you go back to that complainer and do any education with them if it's deemed that there wasn't actually a violation of the regulation?
We haven't had such a situation yet where we were this specific situation that you mentioned. Yeah, so there's no regulatory definition of the time that to respond to this. So that is evaluated on a case-by-case basis, I think. So yeah, there's no regulatory criteria or specific time frame that is specified. So yeah, case-by-case basis. Yeah, but yeah, that is. As I mentioned, we typically work with some other programs where we that already have a kind of a relationship with those farmers, and we go along and also address the nutrient management aspect if needed.
Great. Thank you. I think that's all of our questions for you at this moment, the burning ones. Oh, wait,
Okay.
let's see. Oh, I lied. Wait a second. Here we go. Here's one. If the UMass Soil Lab is so critical to the implementation of the state nutrient management program, there are some concerns about funding of the soil lab and its operation so that it's not underfunded and understaffed. I think that's one that I can address, right? That's a little out of your purview. So
Yeah.
I will say for our soils lab, we did have a retirement. Tracy, who was leading the soils lab and our lead scientist, retired. Yeah, they are actively searching for a replacement, and quite a bit of funding has been put in order to expand some of the services. They want to buy some new equipment that'll make things faster, and there are some efforts to look at possibly offering some soil health testing. So that question is heard loud and clear, and there's a lot going on to try to improve that.
Okay.
But that raises a question for me. So I do know that some people, the UMass lab was closed for a while due to COVID. It's a unique situation there. We're in a campus building, not off site.
Oh.
And so some farmers were sending samples out of state to labs that were moving a little more quickly. So I know that part of the regulations is, you can reference your soil test results. And so if you get a test from an out-of-state lab, are those still considered to be valid records for the NMP planning?
I wanted to point out that the regulations do not require to use the UMass lab. We actually, I think in the earlier version it may have been in there or something, but I think the language is that the soil test needs to be done according to a method that is recommended by UMass, and so we don't even currently I think it's the modified Morgan that is used by the soil test lab. So as long as farmers can submit samples to other labs, and the current recommended method is the modified Morgan. So as long as that is used as the method, then it would be consistent with UMass recommendations for soil testing. So it is certainly allowed to ship it out to other labs out of state even, but as long as the test is done according to the recommended UMass soil test method. So
Great.
that's the regulatory criterion.
Perfect. So that means for those listening, UConn, UMaine, UVM, Cornell, UMass, they're all on the same system. So that's a good place to be in. I'll just give one last question that snuck in. I'm not quite sure if this is the best question for you, but do we know if more manure storage facilities have been built since the regulations went into effect, both liquid and solid?
I'm not aware of it, but that is something that that is the division of technical assistance that probably would have information on that. That's an interesting question. I'll try to follow up on that.
Great, and I think maybe when Kate hops on, she might be able to speak to what she's been seeing with her farm visits. I've seen a few around us. The digesters are a hot new thing for those that can get them set up. That's a great question. So, okay, if you think of more questions, Hotze is going to stay on with us until after Kate's presentation. And so now, Kate, if you are ready, I will pass the bar over to you. Okay, I'm gonna make you the presenter, Kate.
Hopefully I can remember about the sharing screen.
Oh, if not, I'm ready to provide tech support.
Okay. Sorry, now I've lost. Oh, geez. Huh. Oh dear. Huh.
Kate, I'm gonna stop your webcam for just a second because you're frozen.
Yeah.
Or I'm gonna try to. Kate, can you hear us? Uh-oh. So Kate is currently offline, but that's all right. I think she'll hop back on in a minute. So why don't we make this maybe a take 5 moment? So if you need a bathroom break or another cup of coffee, take a minute and we'll wait for Kate to get back online here. And once she does, we'll get rolling again.
All right, it just fell in the void when Masood would have been talking.
I know, sorry. You know what? I told everybody to take 5 and get a cup of coffee, and we'll take a little break. So no pressure.
And now we did this, but now I'm like, where is my?
Well, so now it should give you a little box that asks you to share your screen. There we go.
Oh, yeah. Maybe that makes sense.
So tell me when it's right, because we.
Great. And then go to your display settings.
Yeah. Swap presenter view. Okay.
Great.
That works, right?
Yep, looks good. So I'm going to turn off my camera because help with internet speed, and you can, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Now, where do I put the people? I can put, okay, so I just moved us over to my other screen. That's fine, right?
Yeah, you don't have to see us. And I'm going to turn my camera off too, so you don't have to be distracted by me.
Should I wait a minute or so?
Yeah, you could wait a minute. Maybe if anybody got up and is coming back, maybe in the interim, I don't know if you heard the last question. Do we know if more manure storage facilities have been built since the regulations went into effect, both liquid and solid? I thought maybe you would have seen or heard what people are doing.
Mm-hmm. And what was the year again that the regulations went into effect?
I think the original were 2015.
Okay. I'm sure there are a handful. I guess I can't answer that exactly. Yeah, there are a few. I work out of the state office now, so I'm not, in the field planning the waste storages anymore. But yeah, I would say, I probably would be involved with reviewing the nutrient management plans for those, and there hasn't been too many, but a few.
Yeah, would it be fair to say it seems like the new ones were because new ones were needed, not necessarily directly in response to the regulation?
I would say that's accurate. Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? And because my dogs are barking, so I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to turn the show over to you.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I'm Kate Parsons. I work as a resource conservationist covering agronomy and grazing and soil health concerns, providing technical assistance mostly with our conservation plan, to our conservation planners and as well the farmers directly. But I help out the conservation planners that work in the 7 areas. There's 3 major areas, but in the field offices across the state. So I work out of Amherst. And my first job out of college was writing nutrient management plans. So I did have a few years of experience out in New York State when they first developed the CAFO regulations back in, I'll age myself here, but back in 1998. So this was a topic I felt pretty comfortable with, the nutrient management planning. Okay, so for today, I was going to talk about the NRCS nutrient management standard, just briefly. Why keep records, what is required, a few different forms and format that you could use, and then NRCS practices related to nutrient management, for which there's both technical assistance and financial assistance. All right, so NRCS has a whole suite of conservation practices, and one of them is called nutrient management. It's practice standard number 590. And similar to, I think Hotze had a definition type thing about nutrient management, it is managing the amount, the rate, source, placement, meaning the method of application, and the timing of plant nutrients and soil amendments. So NRCS has this, looks like 8 purposes. You can imagine one of the kind of the primary ones are to improve plant health and productivity, also to reduce excess nutrients in surface and groundwater. Those are kind of the key ones that I think about. Reduce emissions of objectionable odors. When I was out in New York State, one of my jobs was to respond to complaints from the homeowners around the 2,000-3,000 cow dairy farms. So a lot of those were driven by odor and also fear of surface water contamination. Also reduce emissions of particulate matter and particulate matter precursors, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, ozone precursors, reduce the risk of potential pathogens. So that's another biggie here with the nutrients from surface and groundwater from the application. And also improve or maintain soil organic matter. So our planners would be working with farmers across the state in their areas to address sort of these resource concerns, and they might suggest nutrient management to the farmer to address some of these resource concerns if the producer isn't already doing it. Let's see here. Okay, so up here I got why keep records. So number one I have because the mass regulations require it. So by that you're documenting that the plan was followed, which is going to protect yourself. An example would be, I kind of stole this off the internet, but a farmer has applied manure and gets an unexpected heavy rainfall the next day causing runoff. They can prove there was no over application only by keeping detailed records. You know, showing that they applied X amount and it was applied during a period of time when it's acceptable to be spreading manure. So if you didn't have the records, you might be, you know, be like, I don't know if it was 50 ton or 30 ton or 10 ton. But so also records will document that the nutrient timing restrictions were followed. I kind of thought of that after when Hotze was presenting on the frozen ground topic there, or point. Also, records document the changes made during the season that deviated from the plan, i.e., for example, like you didn't rotate a field that was planned to be rotated. Hotze mentioned basically the operator needs to maintain the plan, you know, keep it up to date. So the hayfield would have had different recommendations as like a cornfield would have. So you just want to keep kind of track of everything as changes are made from the original plan. All right, so another reason to keep records, the crop yield records by field support yield goals used to develop nutrient recommendations. It justifies a higher or lower nitrogen and phosphorus applications. You see here, I have this lovely example, which I didn't get back to apparently. So UMass has certain recommendations for nitrogen based on yield goal. So if you say you're shooting for 28 ton to the acre of corn silage, so you base your nutrient recommendations on that, which is going to be a higher nitrogen requirement, and you don't have records to support that, you know, some states where enforcement might be stronger would be questioning, well, why are you putting so much nitrogen on? You know, we need that yield goal seems a little unrealistic. So your yield records would document that you really get those yields and aren't over applying nitrogen or phosphorus. So. And not so much the second one here, not so much that it's a requirement, but it would help you to make sure you're not wasting money, say. That your yield records, you know, right now I'm talking about yield records, which they actually are in the law, combined with nutrient application records and their soil test data, enable you to analyze your fertilizer efficiency and if perhaps nutrient applications can be reduced. Or maybe you realize, you know, you keep good scouting records before harvest and you see which fields are really turning yellow a little earlier than you'd like. You know, you keep records of all that, and that'll help you fine tune your nitrogen management the next year. In terms, I'm talking about corn, obviously, but so you can kind of like figure out how much N am I putting down per yield of, say, silage I'm getting, and kind of where does that fit in the spectrum of what's sort of average, or are you high or are you low? Okay, also to document test plots. So this is if you are doing test plots, but certainly you'd want to, by test plots, I mean, you know, it might be something you're doing on your own, or I'll talk later about stuff we do have available through NRCS. But just like maybe you do a few different strips of nitrogen to help refine your fertilizer application of nitrogen. And, you know, you need to keep track, obviously, of what you did where, because you can kind of forget by the end of the season or 2 years down the road. So, okay, so record keeping requirements. So these are the requirements that are spelled out in our nutrient management standard. And I kind of got reminded that UMass doesn't actually have record keeping guidelines anymore. Samantha had clarified for me before, so that they refer to NRCS standards. So these really don't vary too much from what was listed under the less than 10 acres where no guidelines are available. But regardless, I don't want to make it too confusing. But originally I just put these in here for kind of information's sake of this is what NRCS requires if someone is implementing nutrient management. So naturally all test results, so your soil, manure, compost, any organic byproducts that you're applying, any plant tissue samples you take, they even mention water tests if you're doing some proactive water sampling. So keep track of all those. And you see up here, NRCS requires it for 5 years. Then all nutrient applications, the material, the amount, the date, the method, and the location. And this one I didn't see in the regulations point there, the documentation of all nutrient imports, exports, and on-site transfers. So this would be where, you know, a nutrient management plan has been developed and say it's required to export manure because all the manure can't be spread according to the phosphorus requirement, basically according to soil tests and all the different requirements, and manure is required to be exported. So you need to document that to show, you know, where it went, the X amount of manure left the site. And the same if you're taking in manure or other waste products. Okay, so additionally, it says to, let's see. I guess with all nutrient applications, NRCS wants you to kind of keep track of the weather conditions and soil moisture at the time of application. This is going to be a bit laborious, I would agree. But, you know, basically, was the soil saturated? Or was it a drought? Basically, if it's saturated, you know, there might be more chance of denitrification. So this would be useful for you to keep track of as well as growers and farmers to know, you know, if your nitrogen is short at the end of the season and you know you applied it when it was really wet, well, maybe you lost some of it to denitrification. So then the elapsed time from manure application to rainfall or irrigation. This would kind of be getting at the preservation of ammonia to a certain extent, I think, and maybe also potential for leaching if you got a lot of rainfall after, or runoff. So planting and harvest records. I spoke about the importance of the harvest records before. Naturally, we need to know, what crops are planted, when. Oftentimes nutrients are being applied at the same time. So, you got the date for planting and you'd have the date for any fertilizer applied that day. Yields, nutrient analyses of harvested biomass, and planter crop residues removed. Then you're also supposed to keep track of plan reviews, so the date, name of reviewer, and recommended adjustments resulting from the review. And the standard does get into variable rate nutrient management plans as well. So naturally, if you're applying different amounts of nutrients in different parts of the field, you'd have a map showing where those locations are and what nutrients went in which areas. And then any GPS-based yield maps that you might have, you would include those in your records as well. Obviously, I don't think this is quite as applicable here in Mass, maybe by a few of the grain growers that do this. Okay, so then these are was right out of the Massachusetts regulations. You see that it's mostly all the same things. The soil test results, the nutrient application rates, the recommendations actually. Oops. Quantity analyses and sources of plant nutrients applied, date and method of nutrient application, crops planted, estimated yields, and all activities or protocols recommended or required by the plan. So hopefully that's a good kind of summary of everything that's required. And I can show you where to find the nutrient management standard afterwards, and then the regulations, Hotze mentioned where they can be found. Okay, so first and foremost, the soil test results and the recommended nutrient application rates. So I would recommend, naturally, you'll get a hard copy of all your, well, I like hard copies still, but have a hard copy of all your soil test reports that you got. Keep them, in a notebook or binder. And actually, you can have them on your computer as well. And then you see the second page has the recommendations. So that covers you for your, the recommended rates. Now, this is what I do at home.
So Kate has, excuse me, frozen here for a second. Kate, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but bear with us for just a minute. I'm sure Kate will hop back on.
Actually, here I said all labs use modified Morgan. So I've got the soil test and the recommendations here, so that kind of covers me there. And then the sample date, so that will show that I'm keeping in compliance with, I'm actually getting out of compliance here, but with the regulation of how recent the soil test has to be. So I use my spreadsheet to help sort by pH and help manage my lime application. So I guess in this scenario here, I've sorted it by pH. So I've got all the lowest pHs at the top, and I've got the lime recommendation here that basically when I got the soil test, I entered all the information. Some of it's hidden here; it's not being shown. Like certainly in the lime one, I've removed the phosphorus, but so I've got the lime recs. Then I made a column for the amount of lime I plan to apply, and the total tons, and then I'll keep track of when it was applied. So this, this is obviously very helpful for me. I'm not just doing it for the regulation. And then here I've entered in succeeding, I've got a soil test from 2017 and another one from 2019. So I can show, how things are changing or whatnot, or did my lime work in terms of application, but just documenting, keeping track of all my soil tests and in a way that's helpful for me to manage nutrients on the farm. Now, one of my very first internship was with Cayute. Now, it was a New York Cornell Cooperative Extension office, and I had to learn how to use Access, Microsoft Access, and I don't know, I haven't gone back to using it again, but if someone was more savvy than I am or like good with databases, you'd probably enter this into a database and be able to manipulate it better. But for now, this is what I use, is Excel. Oh. Okay, so moving on. So that was the soil tests and recommendations. Now this is, let's see, the quantities, analyses, and sources of plant nutrients applied, dates and methods. And back here, I guess I kind of, well, I think maybe I'll get to it after, but okay. So this would be naturally for operations with manure, compost, or other organic materials. Basically, you need a system for documenting all applications. So I think I have a few different examples of forms you could use, but you probably keep this in the manure spreader tractor or in the office if that's where you go after you spread manure, or the house. But anyways, you got to keep track of, so you'd probably have a record here for every single date that you spread manure or compost or whatever. You need to know the source. Remember, we need the source. So if you got different types of waste or manure, the load size, the application rate, and I guess here is if you applied various loads per day. And then was it incorporated after? So you should make a note of that. That's for the ammonia preservation. So it'd be important to keep track of which fields had the manure incorporated within so many days. So not only do we want to know the rate, but we need to know the analysis of the manure. So this is just an example of a manure test, and I would load this into my Excel workbook that I had with the amounts and the amount of nitrogen that I would expect to be available as surface applied or as incorporated, or fall applied versus spring, etc. So you'll want to keep track of these as well as you take them. Here's one of the NRCS conservation planners, Bob Purcell, works out of the Worcester County and Middlesex, Essex, and he's made these for farmers with the field map. This prints out as a 8.5 by 11 sheet, or actually whichever size you want, and some notes over here. So you could use this for your manure spreading, keeping track of all the loads and the dates that went on for that field, and have one of these for every field. Or you could use your calendar. I know farmers, we get like 10, 15 calendars a year. Might as well put them to good use. So naturally, like what the field was, and how many loads of whatever type of manure it was, and just kind of keep track of it that way. Again, we're documenting that we're following our plan and that we're meeting the regulations in terms of the amounts and the timing. So the calendar part is for the timing. Now, so that was for manure and organic materials. So now I'm going to kind of move on to overall. So we, again, the quantities, analyses, and sources of plant nutrient supply, dates, methods, and the crops planted and estimated yields. So I think, so in this one here, I kind of like this actually. Just field, and you got your crop, date, here is date planted, the yield, this is something you'd kind of try to keep track of the whole season. Manure, in this case, I would just put the summary, the total amount for the season. And, you know, if it was incorporated not or less than 24 hours or 1 to 3 days, then here I'm going to put my commercial fertilizer. So if we're talking corn, you know, you can make a note for your starter, and then your broadcast or side dress, and other comments. You know, corn fired up was really yellow at harvest, or corn was excessively green at harvest, something to help you kind of, or corn was great, something to help you remind yourself about how things went. So this is a form that we've used with NRCS for quite a few years, or for many years. When we work with producers on nutrient management, we give this to them, and they don't have to use this, but this basically has everything that we would need for the most part. This was just another one from Maryland Extension. You know, I just Googled record keeping forms, and this has almost all exact the same stuff as the last one that I just showed you. So maybe a little more room on it because it's got more space. And then lastly, back to that same one that Bob, you could have one for just manure where you know, and then another one where you summarize everything else, like the summary of the manure, the fertilizer you applied, when you planted, when you harvested, the yield. If you had a forage analysis on it, you know, you could document that on here. Oh, Samantha gave me this idea. So here's the invoice from the fertilizer company. So you could add the pertinent information right to that if you're really a minimalist and don't want to deal with all these extra papers, or you want to save some trees. So we got okay, this is just everything, you know, again, what all is required. So I just put that there to remind myself. But I got the fertilizer analysis here. It's 27,520, you know, so I put down that I put it on hayland, approximate 4 ton to acre yield. If you had, you know, you had real tonnages, and if the tonnages varied, you'd do it by field. Because again, we're justifying our applications. And then I put down 200 pounds the acre, April 15th, broadcast before rain. So this covers pretty much all the stuff that's required. And same concept here. So just on this one, I got 2 different analyses of fertilizer, but they're written out there, so you don't have to rewrite it. And I just jotted down the fields, the rate per acre. It was 2x2 starter fertilizer, and the date I applied it. And I threw in here afterwards a yield goal. Same thing here. And for this analysis, it was these fields. So kind of a simple way. So if you just attach this to your soil test and your map, and then your harvest record, you know, you just said, well, we actually got 23 ton. And if you applied extra fertilizer, you know, so you'd have your other fertilizer potentially. If you did side dress with some chemical fertilizer, you could attach that invoice to the packet, and you'd have most all you need, I'd say. And actually, if you have manure records, then you gotta just attach that one other form. All right, this is how I've done things, is I just I said sunset view, that's not me, but I just put the 2020 corn planting, and I just keep a list like this. I got my, you know, maturity, because I want to know that for myself. But like I said, I think I'm going to go to the NRCS form next year, and I'll probably end up making copies at the end of planting in case I lose them or just they get dirty. But then I'll have one where I keep everything on it. But because if you just do this, you got to combine it with your manure and other documentation. You saw I got booted off of this webinar when I tried to sign on, so I'm not exactly the most computer literate, so I'm probably not going to go to an app too soon, but obviously there's you know, the saying, there's an app for everything. So there is this one that UVM has put out, and I did not look into it much more, but you can just imagine you're entering it in on your phone, so you could have it right there. And I found this calendar. I didn't actually think it was the most useful, but maybe there's some other calendars out there. This was by Nebraska. All right, so I have my binder, and for the last like 3-4 days, I've been asking my mother, "Where's my corn book? I got my corn plant records in there. I want to take a picture." I couldn't find it, and I finally found it in my house. So, anyways, keep a 3-ring binder and keep track of where it is. I like to do this. Have my field maps in there, a little divider, soil test, the raw data, and a summary table. Got my lime recommendations. Once I apply lime, I can put those tickets that they give you and in a paper, just documenting exactly what was done, slide that in there. I got my manure tests, crop uptake tables. That's kind of just helpful to have when you're strategizing on how many nutrients to apply. I mean, you're looking at your recommendations, but I also like to just consider what does the crop take up for nutrients. And then each year you'll have all the records we've been talking about, by field. So your manure, planting dates. I been kind of keeping track of weed control when that was done, fertilizer applications, PSNT results. That's another thing helpful for you to manage in your nitrogen. Harvest dates, yields, like we said, and then we haven't talked at all about cover crop, but that's I think you want to document your cover crops as well, because that's going to be part of the nutrient management plan in terms of nitrogen loss or nutrient runoff from the field. So I definitely keep track of the species, rate, date, method. All right, so there is funding available through NRCS to help implement a variety of practices, but one of them is nutrient management. So it starts with contacting NRCS. I guess I got a thing with the offices on the next page here to develop a conservation plan, and it includes practices that address resource concerns. So we don't just pay for things to pay for things. There has to be a resource concern. So something like sheet and rill erosion, or like we saw, the nutrients or pathogens potentially affecting surface water or groundwater. So things like that would justify, say, nutrient management. So you sign up with an application with NRCS, complete your eligibility paperwork with the Farm Service Agency. Then your application is ranked against others from the state, and they fund them in the order of ranking until the money runs out. And then you implement the practices that you agreed to implement. The plan was developed with a suite of practices potentially, or maybe it's just one, but you implement them according to the standards and specifications, and then the practice is certified and paid. I guess we sort of covered the purposes before, but the primary resource concerns addressed by nutrient management, the nutrients or pathogens to water resources, plant productivity and health, and then the emissions of greenhouse gases and objectionable odor. And there's some more minor ones like the soil quality, soil organic matter, and things like that. So if nutrient management plan was needed on your operation to address one of those resource concerns, these are the payment rates we pay per acre. $7 for basic. With manure, $15 if you're not injecting now and it's recommended to inject for various reasons. That would be $36 an acre as an incentive to do that, basically to reduce nitrogen emissions to the atmosphere and to reduce potential runoff. And then there's a kind of a small farm one that's done on a per farm basis. So signing up and implementing nutrient management would mean basically following our standard. I talked about a bit of it, basically it's following the regs, soil testing your organic sources, applying the nutrients according to the soil test. And then also we require the you know, Hotze talked about field assessments, but we have a nitrogen leaching index and a phosphorus index. So there's a few other things that, you know, basically you'd have a plan developed and you have to implement the plan to make sure that you're not losing nitrogen or phosphorus. And then maintaining the setbacks and all that. So something that you can look into if you're interested. And then we also, this is something that I think is interesting and a good opportunity for some people. It's adaptive management. So again, you'd be applying for nutrient management, and it's financial or technical assistance provided to farmers through EQIP, that's our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, to experiment with something of interest to them on their farm for 3 years. So this is a nutrient management talk. So, you know, nutrient management, you could also do it for reduced tillage. So we've done several of these around the state with no-till and cover crop as well. So you're supposed to replicate them 4 times, the treatments, and the results are measured, analyzed, and farmers adapt. I don't know what that's, adapt as you learn. Oh, looks like I got into some. Okay, so this would just be, I'm almost done here, but a quick example. If you, so say you're curious, do I need to use a corn starter? Will I get the same yield without using a corn starter? Or say, can I decrease my nitrogen fertilizer application and get the same yield? So you could, I said it needs to be replicated 4 times. Well, we've been flexible and let people put 2 of the replications side by side. So you'd have your low end, your regular end, low, and regular. And this pays 21.27 per field there is what per trial per field. And then what we've done with the reduced tillage, the no-till trials, is help the farmer basically done the yield data collection for them. So we could, I guess we've done a trial or 2 with maybe 1 with no N this year, and also some corn starter ones where we compared different treatments. So we could help out with the yield data. But obviously, if the point was to know if yield was affected, you'd collect yield data. And then UMass has been awesome and helped us out with the statistics to know if those differences were significant. So yeah, this is another example of a way you can learn more about nutrient management on your farm, about making some tweaks for whatever reason. And so it's out there for you to try. And these are the 7 offices. I'm sure most people are familiar, but you can contact your local office to request assistance with nutrient management or any other resource concerns. And I guess that's all I got. So I'll leave that page up.
Great, thank you, Kate. You had me cracking up with the notes on the fertilizer invoice. That's obviously my style. So we have a question. I think this could go to either one of you, and it's a really good question. And myself being a, you know, back of the piece of paper note taker, right? Even when we're doing research and then it comes time to write it up and I'm looking for all my notes, I can definitely sympathize with farmers that have a lot of moving pieces. And so this question here, let me get back to it. Where did I just put my questions panel? Oh, I have it open. Okay, yes, here's the question. So obviously it's easy for us when you just have this big cornfield and you're doing corn in a lot of different places. But when we get into our smaller and more diverse farms, of which we have a lot of in Massachusetts, you know, the question is, you know, we're a small, highly diversified farm. Am I supposed to have yield data for each individual planting? We might have 6, 12, 26 sessions of a given crop. So I'm thinking maybe that's a reference to lettuce, if that's in season, but, you know, multiple varieties within each planting. And that's one of possibly 40 different crops. How granular do we need to get, you know, when we have all of these really specific different crops?
You want to give it a go, Hotze? Or I can. Oh, maybe he's got to unmute.
Oh, go ahead, try now. Oh, let's see, hold on. Let me, okay, you should be good now.
Yes, the regulations do not get that specific, and I think it's one reason why we relied on UMass for guidelines. And I'm not sure if the vegetable growing group at UMass has developed some guidelines for nutrient management practices, and I'm not sure if that is part of it, but I know it is. It can get, yeah, if you have an diverse farm with many different crops, it is a lot of information that needs to be collected and kept track of. So yeah, it certainly can be challenging. But again, the regulations do not address this in this much detail.
Maybe I would say probably I don't know, seems like everything's kind of like risk management. So if you don't keep your harvest records, that's probably a much lower risk than not keeping your nutrient application records. So I would certainly, I mean, I know the vegetable growers, you guys often have big kind of field layout maps, and could imagine you got your different blocks labeled. So you can then keep a side record of, each block and what nutrients were applied. And if you don't get to the yield record, it's probably not the end of the world, for sure, I would say. But especially if you're not over applying nutrients, because otherwise I think you could just, say you'd be just shooting for like the average yield to substantiate the nutrients that were applied. So I feel like the nutrients that are applied is perhaps a little more important for sure than documenting the yield if it's too burdensome. I don't know if it's a go or a stab at it.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's reasonable. Obviously, I'm not really in the vegetable world, so maybe someone hears this and says that's a terrible idea. But I wonder if you could back calculate from your sales records. So if you know that you sold X amount in different places throughout the year, maybe if at a later point there's a question, you could say, well, that probably reflects about this much yield. So maybe there's other ways in the data that you already have that you can sort of estimate. I know some farmers that do a lot of silage say, hey, I know this bunker holds about this much, and I know it was full. And so I can estimate this yield. So I think there's some ways to just do your best, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
So, okay, so one request here is, Kate, could you provide links to some of those forms that you showed? So if you have those links, Kate, and you could email those to me, maybe I could share them with our participants.
Yeah.
Also, I do want, this reminds me, this question was asked by actually the person that gave us the idea or the request for this webinar. So I want to say thank you to that, but I also want to encourage others, if you want more information on a topic or there was something you heard today and you would like follow up, send me an email. I'll post my email address a little bit later. And we're usually, if we know you want to learn more about it, happy to put it together. So let us know. Okay, another question for Kate. Could Kate please briefly show the slide on adaptive management trials and the cost share rates? So maybe if you could back up to that one. I don't know if, Brian, you had a specific question or if you just wanted to put eyes on it for a minute. So let us know.
Yeah, and it take a little, actually when I email Samantha those forms, which most of them I have hard copies of, probably is how I do it versus links, but I can also send a link to where you can find our payment rates right on our website. So this is public info. But it might be a little hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for. So those are so these are, maybe I didn't explain that the best. This is like per acre for the most part. This is just for implementing the standard, like doing nutrient management on whole fields. And then the adaptive management is, maybe it was clear enough, but is just for doing a specific trial. So you're not necessarily signing up to do nutrient management on all your acreage, so you don't get the per acre payment. You could actually kind of do both, not on the same land, but so this is for that test plot, you know, that you might do on one particular field.
Great. And so here's another question. Are there any special considerations being made in watersheds with nutrient impaired waters?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to put this down. Okay. Yeah, Massachusetts, we have certain high priority watersheds like the Palmer River down in southeast Mass. Southeast Mass, down towards the Westford area. It's called National Water Quality Initiative. So that was a designated watershed that had impairment due to agricultural nutrient sources and received a dedicated pool of funding for that. So it definitely helps like get practices done. Like they don't have to compete against projects from across the state. And I believe there's another one in the Manhan River in Western Mass here this year, but I'm not 100% positive. So yeah, I guess that was the question, right? There is some designated funding for impaired watersheds for sure. Yeah, it's through the National Water Qualities Initiative. And that's under our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP.
Great. And I just, I briefly put up, I think you should be able to see my screen now. If you find yourself with questions after today, or you are not sure who to contact for your question, just send me an email and I'll try to find who you should be talking to. Here's okay, great. Is this going to be available to watch later? Yes, so we will post this on our UMass website. We will share it, and then it'll be a reference if you have questions later, or you want to share it with others, whether you're an ASP, want to share it with farmers or a neighbor or whatever. It will be available for you. So it looks like questions have just about slowed down. I think we've got to everyone. If you have a question, now is your time to shine. Otherwise, you can send us an email to follow up later. I don't know if either of you have any concluding thoughts or ideas or any other follow-up.
Yeah, I actually thought, I realized I forgot a slide, just like I couldn't find my book.
You know, why don't I go back then? Do you want to show your screen again?
Well, not really.
Not really? Okay. Do you want to share the idea from the slide?
Well, I'll just tell. I was just going to tell. So in my workbook, I don't know. I also will show. I'll load in how much, like the soil test and how much manure was applied, and I show the nutrients NP and K from the manure. Then I put in the starter fertilizer NPK, and then in general we don't broadcast potash. If I did, if I broadcast any fertilizer, I'd put those in. So it's kind of like all columns so that I can have it do the math to help figure out. And then it includes organic matter and like how much nitrogen I might expect to get from the organic matter. So basically at the end, it shows how much additional N and K typically is needed. So it's kind of like my record keeping and again, nutrient management all in one as like a decision-making tool to figure out how much side dress nitrogen is needed. And in there, I would enter my PSNT results if I had any for those fields. And then I guess I'd put what I decided to apply. So that kind of has everything together in Excel so I can easily make this. It's not my favorite decision, but to make the decision on if any extra nitrogen is needed or not. So I guess that slide didn't make the cut. I had another presentation this morning.
You've been busy.
Yep.
The question for you is, maybe this is our last question, is So when you, get into some of the fine details of the regulations, if there's a clarification question, who should people reach out to ask?
That is for me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. The website has my contact information. So yeah, I'm the primary contact for plant nutrient regulation related inquiries.
Great. Just go right to you. All right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And I think my email is also on the last slide of my presentation.
Perfect.
Phone number is also there. So yeah.
Great. So it looks like that was our last question. And I think, you're getting lots of positive feedback in the questions box. Everyone loves you both. Thank you very much. I think this was a great refresher. Thanks so much for being here with us today. And like we've said, if anybody comes up with any questions, get in touch and we'll help you find the right person. Great. All right, I'm going to close down the webinar. I hope everyone stays safe and warm in the snow and gets everything cleared out. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.